Hello Year 10, it's Mr. Godman here and I'm looking forward to taking you for your history lesson today. And in this lesson we're going to look at another exciting and important moment in the Cold War. We're going to look at the Marshall Plan and its consequences. As usual, I'd like you to get yourself ready for the lesson by getting out your history workbook and a pen. You might need some scrap paper, and I'd like you to put away all distractions, so turn off televisions and put your mobile somewhere safe. If you need to, pause and get yourself ready. When you're done, hit play again. So it's time for your do now task, and that's activity 2.1 in your workbook. Last lesson we were looking at the consequences of the Truman Doctrine. So here you have 5 knowledge recall questions about that topic. Now remember, the reason why we're doing this is to try to improve your memory and your recall. So I'd like you to try and do it without using any of your notes, even if that means you need to sit and think really hard about these questions. So pause while you're doing that, and when you're finished, hit play again and we'll look at the answers. So here are the correct answers, and I'd like you to mark your work now. If you get one of the questions wrong, then I'd like you to put down the correct answer, preferably in a different colour pen. And don't forget to mark your quiz out of 5 at the end. When you're ready, hit play and we'll move forward. So today's lesson is called What Were the Consequences of the Marshall Plan? We're going to look at the reasons why Truman introduced the Marshall Plan. We're going to look at the key features of the plan and what was in it. And we're also going to look at the results or consequences which the Marshall Plan had for the superpowers. Next, I'd like you to update your knowledge organiser. Now we're still working on theme 2 today, the development of the Cold War. We're going to look at event 15 on your timeline, Marshall Aid. We might use this word imperialism, word 11, on your vocab list. And much of what we do today is connected to concept 3, containment. Pause now if you need to, and finish highlighting your knowledge organiser. Next, it's time for your starter. This is activity 2.2 in your workbook. You have some photographs that I'd like you to look at. They were taken in European countries at the end of World War II. By that time, most European countries were devastated after years of war. What economic and social problems can you see in the photos? I'd like you to look at your photos really carefully. I'd like you to pause the video and spend a few minutes writing down your ideas. When you're ready, hit play again. Let's look at some good answers to that question. You might have noticed those ration books. There were shortages of food in many European countries by the end of the war. So people were going hungry, and what food there was had to be rationed. You might have noticed the destruction which was caused by the bombing during World War II, with many people's homes and many factories and industry completely wiped out. That damaged the economies of European countries, so there was high unemployment and people were struggling to find work. Did you see the picture which showed that bridge over the river that had been completely destroyed? Europe's infrastructure had been destroyed. Bridges, roads, railways had been damaged by the conflict. And many Europeans have been displaced by the war. That means they've been forced out of their home countries. They now began to head home as refugees. So there were refugee camps, particularly in the east. I'd like you to pause now and write down one of these ideas which you missed. When you're ready, hit play again. Now, Truman was very worried that poor Europeans suffering in these terrible conditions might turn to communism. What is it about communist ideology that makes it so attractive to the poor? What do communists offer to people who are struggling in poverty? I want you to pause now and write down your ideas on that question. When you're ready, hit play again. So let's look at a good answer here. Communist ideology is very attractive to people in poverty because it promises them improvements. Communism promises an end to inequality. There'll be no social classes and everyone will be equal. Communists also promise to take land and property from the rich and share it among society. Communists guarantee all workers a job. They also promise that the profits of industry will be shared fairly and distributed across society so that everybody has enough to thrive. Hopefully you can see that those suffering in poverty might have been attracted to communist ideas. And now it's time to introduce some new knowledge. Here's our big picture. Remember, we're looking at the development of the Cold War between 1947 and 1949. And today, we're going to look at the Marshall Plan. Now, do you remember when we looked at the Truman Doctrine last lesson? Truman said that America should play a leading role in the world. He was fiercely anti-communist, and he said the USA should try to contain communism or stop it spreading. And that to do this, the USA should intervene in countries which were at risk of falling to communism by offering them aid. For example, to Greece. Now this had consequences. The communists in Greece were defeated with the help of American aid. Rivalry between the superpowers increased. And thirdly, American involvement in Europe also increased. And that's the consequence which I'd like us to focus a little more on today. As a result of the Truman Doctrine, the USA began to play a bigger role in the affairs of Europe. And one way it did this was through the Marshall Plan. Here's General Marshall. He was Truman's Secretary of State, and in 1947 he toured Europe and he saw the huge poverty caused by years of war. General Marshall concluded that the conditions in Europe were so bad, many Europeans were tempted to turn to communism. So in June 1947, General Marshall set out a plan to give American economic aid to Europe, to help it recover so that Europeans would not turn to communism. So what was actually in the Marshall Plan? Well, it had four key features that you need to know about. Firstly, the USA provided $12 billion of aid to European countries to help them rebuild their war-torn economies. This aid was given in different forms. including money, food, and technology. The aid was offered to all European countries, not just Western European countries, but Soviet satellite states too. However, the aid was conditional. In order to receive the aid, countries had to agree to allow their finances to be inspected by the USA. And Truman was well aware that Stalin would never agree to this. This Marshall Plan had huge consequences for the future of the Cold War. Firstly, Western European economies began to recover with the help of American aid. Now, this is a slow process. It doesn't really take off until the 1950s, but we need to bear it in mind for later on in our course. Secondly, as Western European economies recovered, support for communism in Western Europe fell. People were living a better standard of living, so they felt less attracted to communist ideas. Thirdly, the Marshall Plan increased rivalry between the superpowers. Stalin was furious about the plan and he denounced it. In his view, the USA was using its money to buy influence in Europe. The Americans were using their dollars to dominate European countries. So Stalin called this dollar imperialism. Stalin barred all satellite states from applying for American aid. He was worried that if they accepted it, they might fall under American influence, and he could never agree to this. And instead, the Soviet Union began tightening its control of the satellite states. To do this, Stalin set up two organizations. Firstly, Cominform, and secondly, Comecon. You're going to read a little bit more about those in a moment, and we're going to look a little bit more in detail at them next lesson. And you're ready now for your main activity, which is activity 2.3 in your workbook. As always, it's really important that you do your reading before you attempt the task. You have 3 keywords to define in your own words. I'd like you to describe how Western European countries benefited from the Marshall Plan. Try and give some specific examples if you can. And lastly, I want you to complete this table showing the consequences or results of the Marshall Plan. And you have 3 columns to think about: results for the USA, results for the Soviet Union, and results for superpower relations. Well done in today's lesson, Year 10. If you'd like to take this further, you could do a little research of your own on the Marshall Plan. Try investigating the different types of aid which were given to different Western European countries. You could research perhaps the aid that was given to Germany and Britain and France. Which country was given more aid? You could start with this website. And that brings us to the end of the lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can do by clicking on the link here. There are all sorts of Cold War videos there where you can take your knowledge further. And I'll look forward to teaching you next time.